All right, now I'm going to do a tournament style puzzle solution where we're just going to do one puzzle that's not as difficult as some of the other ones I do. This is more for the lower ranked players who are trying to build their skills and get some, get some business going. So what we do is we're going to do all the moves. I'm going to do it. We do it in our head without touching pieces, just like you do when you play in an actual game. So what we're going to look at four things basically. We're going to look at checks, captures, piece contacts, where we can go and move, like we move a piece that will, attack or defend another piece. And we'll also look at the overall board situation. And there's no order. You can look at these in any order. But these are the four things we look at. I mean, when I look at the position, my first thing is that, now it's based on your experience level, but what jumps out at you? So different things could jump out at you first. The first thing that jumps out at me was that this guy has got two of my pawns under attack. He has my h5 pawn under attack by his king. He also has my a3 pawn under attack by his bishop. So we got a problem. We got to try and figure out which one of these pawns is the one that's the most helpful for us or dangerous for him. Or also, what's the most dangerous if we lost one of them? Okay, so there's not any captures that we can make, since all of his pawns are on white squares. He's got a black bishop or dark squared bishop, and we have a dark squared bishop, so we could do that. We can't. Our bishop can't take his bishop. Our king doesn't contact anything. So your first thing you look at is, well, man, king to g4 would defend the h pawn, but then he's going to play bishop takes a3. We're going to lose that a pawn. And what happens is if he plays bishop takes a3, he's going to just move, like the next move he'd make essentially would be like, bishop to e7 or bishop to f8, and then just push that pawn a3, a2, a1. You see our black bishop really has almost no chance to get there. So we really, if you look at this on that level, we cannot afford to lose the a3 pawn. If we lose that pawn, it's basically over. So everything, this is experience, and you need to have this experience available to help you get the experience. Okay, the other way to get the experience is to play the wrong move and lose, and then try to figure it out later. Well, that is useful, no question, but that's not the best way. The best way is to learn these in advance to avoid this in the future. Okay, so, that would say, well, if you think that you see a way to defend that pawn on a3, I'd say raise your hand, but I can't see that. So, but if you see it or not. There's one move we can play that will defend that pawn, right? Hopefully you see it, but if you don't, pause the video and we'll be right back. And we're back. Okay, so hopefully you guys said, well, okay, I saw bishop to d6, which is a terrific defensive move. It guards our pawn. Now, the problem we're going to have after that move is, okay, yeah, that's cool, but he's going to just go, if he has any smarts at all, he's going to take our pawn on h5, or he's going to play bishop to b2 and then chow down on that e3 pawn. I'm sorry, c3. My mistake. So the weakness that we have is that our pawns are on his bishop's color. So, our king could go to g4, but he's just going to chow down on our pawns. Okay, so bishop to d6 is not exactly what you call the eternal panacea. It doesn't fix everything. But it's a good move. It's a place to start. The next thing is, well, we could check his king, right? So how can we check his king? Oh, I guess before I mention that, I should say, you should always count the pawns and the pieces to see what your situation is. And so white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. Black has also 5. So the material is completely even at this moment. So how can we check this black king? I heard somebody said bishop to f4 check. Of course, I'm making that up, but it sounds cool. So bishop to f4 check. Well, he's just going to take my bishop, right? If he takes the pawn with the king, what good move would white have? And I know I heard somebody say, ooh, bishop takes bishop. Yeah, that's right. So clearly, if we check him with the bishop on f4, he has to take it. Bishop captures bishop, and then, well, we're going to capture it. King captures bishop. Okay, this is the key. You'll notice that with his bishop gone, we lose the threat against our a3 pawn. So we've solved one of the problems of the position for white, is the defense of the a3 pawn, and then by extension the defense of c3 and d4, because that bishop was going to go to b2 and just, he was going to chop our pawns like a mad woodsman. So bishop to f4 check is a tremendous move, because he plays bishop takes bishop, we play king takes bishop. Now when you look at this, he's going to take the pawn on h5. That's fairly obvious. But what's happened here, and this is really key, is that we've saved the a3 pawn. That part was obvious. But what we've done is we've transferred this and changed this position from a bishop's endgame to a king and pawn endgame. In the king and pawn endgame, the power of what is known as the distant or outside passed pawn is devastating. So when the bishops are gone and the white king sits here, I'm going to put this marker for you guys. When the king is sitting here, now he's going to take this h5 pawn. Okay, black is going to play that move, but that is the point. The h5 pawn is far away from the rest of the pawns. Hopefully you can see that. This is why it's called the distant, or sometimes it's called the outside passed pawn. And what it does is it distracts the enemy king, making him go as far away as possible from the rest of the board action. So we want to use the diversion of him playing king takes h5, and we want to go after his pawns. Because if you notice, if he takes our pawn, I'm going to go through the moves from the beginning again so you see them all. And you want to visualize this in your mind as you're looking at the board. There's nothing wrong with that. This is how we play chess. Bishop goes to f4 check. He has to take it. Bishop takes bishop. King takes bishop. It's materially even. Now we have this distant passed pawn, which we're going to sacrifice to get in here, and we're going to play Pac-Man with these guys right here. So he's going to take this pawn. Our king is here after we take the bishop. So let's do this again. Bishop f4 check. Bishop captures bishop. King captures bishop. King takes h5. King goes to e5. At this point, I'm telling you right now, you may not know this yet, but this game is already won for white. Because now he's captured the pawn. He's got to head back to try and defend some of these pawns, but it doesn't matter. He can go king to g6, threatening to go king to f7 to defend this pawn, but we're just going to chop it off. So he's here. We were here. We went king e5. He has to go. This best move would be king to g6. King takes e6. and he is completely lost because he cannot get closer to the pawns. He could go either king to g5. That's the closest he could get, or king to g7. We're just going to go chop, chop. And after we've chopped these guys, these 3 pawns are now passed pawns. And you could, if you felt like you needed to, you could go and chop the rest of them. Because if you chop all of his pawns, you can't lose. Okay? Now, as a master player, I don't have to chop all of his pawns. But I don't really care. The point that you guys, I'm trying to get you guys to increase your powers. And I say a win is a win. If you have to go and clean the guy's clock, take all of his pawns, and then win, so be it. You know, in the future, you'll be stronger where you won't have to do that, and that's okay. I don't mind. To me, I say a win is a win. When you go and play in a tournament and you win a game, when you win your first tournament game, and you have your name with a 1 next to it, and the other guy has his name and a 0, people aren't going to say, yeah, well, you know, a million negative things. How'd your game go? Oh, you won? Wow, that's good. You know, I mean, that's the goal, right? So, we have this guy now. We've gone through, we've defended everything with this bishop to f4 check, bishop takes, king takes, and temporarily we lost his pawn, the sacrifice, to distract the king away from his guys. Now, his problem is, he doesn't have a choice. He has to take this pawn. If he doesn't take it and goes back here and then goes to f7 to defend it, we just push it to the point where he'd have to come back and take it. There's nothing he could do. All right? So let's play the moves. Now that we've figured out everything, we double-checked everything, we're ready to make the moves like a tournament. Bishop to f4 check. See, we were correct. He had to take it. We have to take it or we're going to lose. He had to take this, and now we're going to go play Pac-Man with his pawns. Waka, 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 waka. Okay? He's gone. So this is a very important type of a problem, especially for the lower ranked players. He's got 2 threats. King threat, king takes pawn, also bishop takes pawn. Luckily for us, we had one move which solves the most important problem. You know, if we played bishop to d6, we would be, you know, we might have a chance to draw this game. Okay? But it's going to be super hard, man, and it's not cool. You know, because he would take this, and then we'd probably play like, you know, king to e2. If he played king, now he could play king to d2. I mean, rook bishop to d2. So if we play bishop d6, he can play bishop to d2. This prevents us from going into this pawn because it's guarding this square. And if we defend the pawn with the king, waka, 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 he is going to do the same thing to us. So it's just terrible. So we use this move, which was a double effect move. It defended this pawn not by directly defending it. This is what is known as indirect defense. We made a move that presented a threat to the enemy that was greater than his threat of this. And that threat was we checked him, which he has to answer. And we were able to eliminate his most valuable and dangerous piece, which was his bishop. And when we did this, we turned this from a bishop's endgame to a king and pawn endgame. And so now, this is the lesson of the distant passed pawn. He's concerned with this guy. He cannot defend these guys. We would just push this until he had to go back to stop it. We jump to e5, and it's Pac-Man waka, waka, waka. 3 easy ones, right? This all went according to plan. Now, it does that. I make this look easy. As my chemistry professor used to say, that, you know, when you really are good at something, you can tend to make it look easier than it is. One of the things that you become as a good player is that as a good player, you're going to be able to more accurately predict your opponent's moves. This is a product of studying, understanding things that are important versus things that only look important, and a lot of practice. And that's why I figured out what he was going to do. Bishop checks. This is obvious. He has to take it. This is not a genius player's move. Okay, and then, well, he took our bishop. We take it back. You don't have to be Albert Einstein to figure this out. Okay. Now we look at this as a chess player. I know this pawn is worth way more than one pawn. You guys, you see this, well, this is just a pawn, it's a pawn. Well, this pawn is the most important pawn on the board because only the king can stop it. This pawn can be stopped by this pawn or this king. So, same thing, these other pawns either can't move, this one can move. So we can stop this with our king or this pawn if we have to. Our king literally has the freedom to run around and do whatever he wants because if he pushes this pawn, we take it. He pushes this one, we just take it. And he can never push past us. So it's okay. So this is the distant pass pawn, which automatically commands the attention of the enemy king. Automatically. That's the key. So he took it as he should. But the distraction away from the target, this is what cost him the game. There's nothing he could do. Black has played every move perfectly. The position was winning for white, even though at the beginning it looks terrible. This is what chess power gives you. As you practice and get better, you're going to see this stuff. And once we take the e6 pawn, it's Pac-Man. There's nothing he could do. We're just going to eat these guys. He's dead. So the thing was over. So this is a real good, very fundamental lesson. We took a bad bishop endgame, and luckily we were able to make a check and trade off his best piece. So that helped a lot. So go over this, make sure you understand this concept. This distant pass pawn, it wins every time. And it doesn't matter whether this pawn was on h5 or h2 or h4, h3. It doesn't matter where this pawn is. If you take your board and set it up, say, okay, you put it on h2 or h3, whatever, black to move. Well, he's going to have to go after this. If you take and go, well, I'm just going to go, let's say it's on h2, it's not a threat. Well, it is, but you're just not recognizing it. You know, I'm going to go back here and, you know, king to g7, king to e5 is what white should play, obviously. And then king to f7. Haha, I defend you from your Pac-Man assault. Yeah, good luck, chump. Okay, king to f7. Ooh, how about I play h4? So he's like, oh, h4. Well, I'm still top dog. King to e7, guarding this pawn. Oh, I'll play h5 now. What are you going to do? Uh-oh. King to f7, maybe? I'm still the top dog? Oh, h6. Come and get it, baby. See, what happens is this pawn is going to threaten the queen at some point. This king is going to have to go Carudzilla. King to g6. And when he does that, chop. Waka, waka, waka. Game over. There's no way. This pawn in this position ends up costing black 3 pawns minimum. We could get 5 if we really want to press it, but I really only need to get 2 and then step back here and just cash this guy in on d4 to d8, right? Just, you know, one of the things my dad would say is like, don't be greedy. You know, do what you have to do, take what you have to take, but don't be greedy because it'll get you in the end. So this is that's one of my dad's famous lessons. Don't be greedy in chess. So many times people got greedy and then they lost because they lost sight of what their opponent was doing. They got wrapped up in their own plans of waka 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 waka, you know, eating pawns like Pac-Man. So This guy is the key. Once we traded the bishops off, this guy became worth at least 3 pawns. Pretty awesome. So this is one of the most basic, king and pawn end game fundamentals, is the distant passed pawn. Now, I'm going to mention this again. You should know this, but if you don't, I have to tell you. Passed, P-A-S-S-E-D, pawns are pawns that are not blocked by another pawn. So when you saw that H5 pawn, he is known as a passed, 2 S's, passed pawn. He's past any influence of any other pawn. That's what it means. So hopefully that helps. So hopefully you enjoyed this. These kind of things will make you stronger. All right? So you got to do these kind of problems. You guys know what to do. I'll talk to you later.